I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it, not just pass over it like a rhetorical question that doesn't require a real answer. Where are you, financially? Not in terms of a number, not your salary, not your savings balance, not some metric you'd quote to a bank. I mean, where are you in relation to freedom? How far are you from a life where the money takes care of itself? Where you're not dependent on next month's income to keep things running? Where work is something you choose, not something you have to do to survive? Most people have never seriously asked that question, not because they don't care about the answer, but because nobody ever gave them a map. They have a vague sense that they're working towards something, that things will get better, that eventually, somehow, the financial pressure will ease. But without a map, you can't know how far you are. You can't know which direction to move, and you definitely can't know when you're actually making progress versus just moving fast on a road that goes nowhere useful. Today I want to give you the map. It's not my map exactly. I came across the concept in a book, and the framework it described matched something I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. 7 levels. A ladder from total financial dependency all the way to genuine abundance. I'm going to walk through every level today. I'll tell you what each one actually feels like, not just what it technically means. And I'll tell you, honestly, where I am on that ladder right now. Because I think honesty about that is more useful than pretending I'm further along than I am. And before anything else, nothing in this video is financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm a 38-year-old dad who works from home, reads about money, thinks about money, and makes mistakes about money. If you need professional guidance, go find it. This is just one person's thinking. Take it accordingly. Okay, let's start at the bottom. Before I go through the levels, I want to say something about why this kind of framework is useful in the first place. Because someone might argue, this is just labels. You're putting people in categories. What does that actually change? And my answer is, everything. Here's why. Most people experience their financial life as a continuous fog. They know things are stressful. They know they want more. They have a vague sense of making progress sometimes and losing ground other times. But they don't have clear markers. They don't have a way to say, I used to be here, and now I'm here, and this is what the next step looks like. Without markers, 2 things happen. First, you can't celebrate real progress. You make a genuinely significant move. You pay off a debt, you build an emergency fund, you start investing, and it barely registers. Because it's just another thing that happened in the fog. There's no framework that says, this just moved you from level 1 to level 2. That's real. That matters. Second, without markers, discouragement is impossible to distinguish from accurate assessment. If you feel like you're not making progress, is that because you're actually stuck? Or is it because you have no way of measuring movement? You don't know. So the discouragement tends to win by default. A map doesn't remove the difficulty of the journey, but it does tell you where you are. And that, just that, changes everything about how you move. I also want to say something about the emotions attached to these levels. Some people, when they see a framework like this, immediately feel shame. They look at the ladder and they locate themselves near the bottom and they feel judged. Like there's a right answer and they're giving the wrong one. I want to be clear, that's not what this is for. The bottom of this ladder isn't a moral failure. It's a starting point. Almost everyone you know has been there. A significant percentage of people you respect are still there, quietly, privately, in ways they don't talk about at dinner. Financial level is not character. It's a reflection of decisions, circumstances, information, and timing. Some of those things are in your control. Some aren't. The point of naming where you are isn't to feel bad about it. The point is to know, so you can move. That's all. The bottom of the ladder, level -1. The name is harsh, dependency, and I understand if you flinch at it. But let me describe what it actually means, practically, in the texture of a real life. You're living month to month, paycheck to paycheck. The money that comes in goes out, all of it, or nearly all of it. And when something unexpected happens, you don't have a buffer. You borrow, you use credit, you ask someone. And that's not the worst part. The worst part is the specific kind of anxiety that comes with it. The calculation that runs every time you see a number on a screen. The way your stomach responds to unexpected bills. The way the end of the month feels. That closing in feeling when you can see the numbers getting small and there's still week left. I know that feeling. I've been there. And I think almost everyone who's been an adult for more than a few years has visited this level, even if they don't talk about it. At level -1, you're also often carrying some form of debt that isn't helping you build anything. Consumer debt. Credit card balances that don't go down. A loan that made sense at the time and now just exists as a monthly obligation. And the debt creates a trap that's not just financial, it's psychological. Because debt has a way of making the future feel inaccessible. When you owe, the future money is already spoken for before it arrives. There's no space in it to build. There's no slack. And without slack, there's no resilience. No ability to absorb a shock without the whole structure cracking. Here's something I want to say carefully, because it matters. If you're at level -1 right now, if this is where you recognize yourself, the single most important thing is not a financial strategy. It's not an investment approach. It's not a budgeting system. It's understanding that this level is temporary if you decide it is. Not through wishful thinking, not through a lucky break, through a decision to treat the situation as a problem with a solution. Slow, maybe painful, but solvable, rather than as a permanent condition. The danger of level -1 isn't just the financial reality. It's the way long-term exposure to that reality can start to feel normal, like the baseline, like the level at which life happens. It isn't. It's a starting point, and starting points can be left. But leaving requires first being honest enough to say, this is where I am. Not as a source of shame, just as the true current location on the map. Level 0. I call this one the invisible milestone, because objectively, something significant has happened at this level. But subjectively, in terms of how it feels, it often doesn't register as progress at all. At level 0, you're earning more than you're spending on living. You're not dependent on credit to get through the month. And crucially, you're either saving something or actively paying down debt. That's real. That's a meaningful change. But here's why it doesn't feel like one. Because level 0 still feels precarious. You're above the waterline, but only just. The savings are small, the margin is thin. One significant unexpected cost, a medical expense, a car repair, a month of lower income, and you're back in the water. The anxiety doesn't go away at level 0. It just changes shape slightly. Instead of the immediate fear of not making it through the month, it becomes the medium-term fear of what happens if something goes wrong, if the thin margin disappears, if the modest savings that exist get eaten by something unexpected. Level 0 is also where I think a lot of people get stuck, not because they can't move forward, but because they don't know that moving forward is possible from here. At level 0, the habits are starting to form. The direction is there, but the destination isn't clear yet. And when the destination isn't clear, there's a real risk of spending the surplus, the margin above living costs, on consumption that feels like reward. You've worked hard, you're not in debt. Surely you deserve this thing. And often, the thing is fine. The thing might be fine. But if deserving the thing consistently absorbs the margin, if every improvement in income immediately becomes new consumption, then level 0 becomes a ceiling rather than a floor. You stay there, longer than necessary, sometimes indefinitely. If I'm honest about my own history, I've spent a lot of time in the territory between level -1 and level 0, moving back and forth across that line, sometimes above it, sometimes, in harder periods, below it. What finally started moving me consistently above and keeping me there wasn't a dramatic change in income. It was understanding that the margin, the gap between what came in and what went out, was the most valuable thing I had. Not the income itself, the gap. And the job was to protect the gap, not to fill it. That sounds simple. It took me much longer than it should have to actually act on it. Level 1 is where things start to feel genuinely different. Not safe yet, not free, but different. At level 1, you have no consumer debt. The credit cards are paid off, the short-term loans are gone. The monthly obligations are things that actually provide ongoing value. Housing, utilities, the costs of a real life, not the residue of past spending decisions. And on top of that, you have an emergency fund. I want to talk about emergency funds for a moment, because I think they're both undervalued and misunderstood. The standard advice is 3 to 6 months of expenses, and that's the right range, roughly. But what an emergency fund actually is, in terms of what it does to your psychology, not just your finances, is this. It converts your relationship with risk. Without an emergency fund, every unexpected event is a crisis. Your car breaks down, crisis. You get sick and miss work, crisis. Something in the house fails, crisis. The crises aren't necessarily catastrophic in themselves, but they require debt to solve. And debt accumulates. And accumulated debt makes the next crisis worse. With an emergency fund, unexpected events are inconveniences, not emergencies, inconveniences. Your car breaks down. You pay for it from the fund. You replenish the fund over the next few months. Life continues without structural damage. That shift, from crisis to inconvenience, is not just financial. It changes something about how you hold your life. There's a steadiness at level 1 that doesn't exist at level 0 or below. Not comfort exactly, but steadiness. I want to say something specific about what it feels like to be a parent at level 1 versus below it, because the emotional texture of financial stability changes significantly when there are children involved. Below level 1, at -1 or even 0, every month has this low-level current of worry running underneath everything. Not just for yourself, for them. What if this month is harder than expected? What if something happens? What if I can't cover something they need? That worry doesn't go away completely at level 1. I won't pretend it does. But it gets quieter, because for the first time, there's actually something between your family and the next crisis. A real buffer. A few months of breathing room that didn't exist before. For me, and this is personal, this is specific to my situation, the moment I had a real emergency fund was the first time in years that I slept through a full night without doing the calculation in my head. Not every night, not permanently, but sometimes. And sometimes is better than never. The other thing that happens at level 1 is that you start to be able to save with some consistency. Not life-changing amounts necessarily, but consistently. Month after month, something goes into the pot that isn't earmarked for anything immediate. And that accumulation, slow as it feels, is the first real evidence that you're building something rather than just maintaining something. At levels below this, you're managing. Level 1 is the first level where you're genuinely building. That distinction matters more than it might seem, because managing is reactive. You respond to what happens. You keep the plate spinning. Building is intentional. You're creating something that didn't exist before, something that will make the future different from the present. Level 1 is where that shift begins. Level 2 has a name that sounds almost too good for what it actually describes: freedom. But the freedom at this level is specific. It's not financial independence, that's further up the ladder. It's a particular, valuable kind of freedom that I don't think gets discussed enough. At level 2, you have no debt. And because you have no debt, and because your investments are beginning to grow, the passive income is starting, even if it's modest. You can choose what work you do. Let me explain what I mean by that. When you're carrying significant debt and living close to your income, you can't afford to be selective. You take the available work, even if it's not what you'd choose. You stay in the job because leaving would be too risky. You tolerate conditions you'd rather not tolerate because the alternative, disrupting the income, is scarier than the discomfort. At level 2, that calculus starts to shift. Not because you have infinite resources, but because the absence of debt and the presence of investments mean that a disruption in income, while still unwelcome, is not catastrophic. You have time. You have flexibility. You have the ability to say no to something that doesn't serve you without the whole structure collapsing. That's a qualitative change in how you experience your working life, not just your financial life. Think about what that freedom means in practice. For someone working a job they don't love, and most people at some point work jobs they don't love, the absence of options is one of the most draining things about it. Not the work itself necessarily, but the knowledge that you can't leave, that the paycheck is the leash, that any discomfort, any mistreatment, any situation that degrades you slightly day after day, you have to absorb it, because the alternative is financial chaos. At level 2, that changes. You may still choose to stay. You may still choose the stable income over the uncertain alternative, but it's a choice. And choices feel different from compulsions, even when the outcome is the same. The work doesn't change, but your relationship to it does. And I think that shift from compulsion to choice is one of the most underappreciated benefits of moving up this ladder. It's not about luxury, it's about agency. Level 2 is also the first level where your investments start to feel real. Below this level, investments, if they exist at all, feel almost theoretical. The amounts are small enough that the growth is imperceptible. You check the numbers and they've moved slightly, but not in ways that change anything practical. At level 2, the amounts have grown enough that you can start to see, concretely, not abstractly, how they might eventually support you. The math starts to look like a real trajectory rather than a wish. And that visibility matters, because belief in the process is what keeps you building through the parts that feel slow and invisible. When you can see the mechanism working, even modestly, even early, the discipline required to keep feeding it becomes less about willpower and more about understanding. You're not forcing yourself to save. You're protecting something you can see is working. That's different. The top 3 levels are where the language starts to feel almost aspirational. And I want to be careful here, because aspirational content about money has a bad reputation, and for good reason. It tends toward the unrealistic, the performed, the Instagram version of wealth that has nothing to do with most people's actual lives. That's not what I'm going for. So let me describe these levels the way they actually feel, as real states that real people reach, through real slow work, not through luck or a single clever move. Level 3, security. At level 3, something specific has happened with your investments. They've grown large enough that, if you never added another dollar, the passive income and the accumulated assets would cover your basic living expenses for the rest of your life. Read that again slowly. The rest of your life. Not for a few years, not until something goes wrong. Indefinitely. The basic expenses, not the luxury version of your life. The actual foundation, shelter, food, the necessities. This is not the same as never needing to work again. Most people at level 3 still work because they want to, because they enjoy it, because their lifestyle costs more than the basic expenses. But there's something that changes at this level that I think is almost impossible to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. The work becomes different. When you know that your baseline survival is covered, permanently, without requiring your active labor, the work you choose to do is chosen freely. Completely freely. It can be exactly what you want to do. It can be impractical by conventional standards. It can be something that wouldn't sustain you if it were the only income. Because it isn't the only income. The foundation exists underneath it. Level 3 is where genuine security begins. Not the feeling of security that fluctuates for everyone, but the actual condition of security, the real thing. Level 4. Independence. Level 4 takes what Level 3 established and extends it. At Level 4, your investments and passive income cover not just the basics, but your actual current lifestyle. The life you're living right now, with its real costs, its specific shape. This is the level most people associate with the word retirement. The level where the active income becomes truly optional. Not because you have enough to live on a minimal budget, but because you have enough to live the way you actually live. The freedom at this level is qualitatively different from Level 3. At Level 3, you're secure but constrained in how you can live. At Level 4, the constraint is gone. You don't have to simplify. You don't have to downsize. You don't have to give anything up. You can just choose. Choose to work. Choose not to. Choose to do the work you want, at the pace you want, for the reasons you want. This is the level that the FIRE community calls the target, the finish line for most people building toward financial independence. And before you say, "This is for other people, not for me," I want to push back on that. Hard. Because the people who reach Level 4 are not, in the majority, people who were born with advantages. They're not lottery winners. They're not people who got unusually lucky. They're people who understood the mechanism, started early enough, and protected the gap between income and spending consistently over a long enough time. That's it. That's the whole thing. It's slow. It's not exciting. It doesn't make a good headline. But it's real. And it's available to more people than culture would have you believe. Level 5. Abundance. I'll be honest, Level 5 is not where I'm thinking. Not right now. Maybe not ever, depending on how life moves. Level 5 is where the passive income doesn't just cover your current lifestyle. It covers the lifestyle you'd want if you had no constraints. The version of your life that you imagine when you imagine having truly more than enough. I think it's worth knowing this level exists, worth knowing what it looks like. But I also think spending too much time imagining Level 5 when you're at Level 0 or 1 is a distraction from the actual work. The most important thing is not to visualize the top of the ladder. It's to take the next step on the one you're actually on. Okay, I said at the beginning I'd be honest about where I am on this ladder. So here it is. Right now, genuinely, not as a performance of humility, I'm somewhere between Level 0 and Level 1. I have income. I'm not dependent on credit to get through the month. I have some savings. There's no consumer debt. But the emergency fund isn't where it should be. The investments exist and are growing, but they're not growing fast enough yet to feel like a trajectory rather than a hope. And there are months, real months, not hypothetical ones, where the margin is tighter than it should be, where something unexpected would cause a real problem. That's the honest answer. Level 0 to Level 1. On my way toward 1. Not there yet. I want to sit with that for a moment, because I think the gap between where I am and where I want to be is actually the most useful thing I can share. I'm 38. I've been working for a long time. I have skills, I have income, and I'm still in the early part of this ladder. That's uncomfortable to say. It would be easier to position this differently, to suggest I'm further along, to be vague enough that people assume I'm writing from a place of having figured this out. But I haven't figured it out. I'm figuring it out, which is different. And the reason I think that's worth saying clearly is this. If you're in your 20s and you're at Level -1 or Level 0, you have time that I don't have. And the best use of that time is to understand this framework earlier than I did and start moving intentionally. Not quickly necessarily, not aggressively, intentionally. Because the difference between someone who understands this ladder at 25 and starts moving up it slowly and deliberately versus someone who figures it out at 38 and starts scrambling. The difference is enormous. Compounding is the reason. Time is the reason. The earlier you understand the map, the more useful the map becomes. Here's what I know about my own path from here. The move from where I am to level 1, real, solid level 1, requires two things. First, bringing the emergency fund to where it actually should be. Not the version I've been telling myself is good enough. The version that would actually hold if something went seriously wrong. Second, protecting the investment gap with more consistency than I have been. Not more aggressively, just more consistently. Not letting the good months become consumption and only the bad months become savings. Those aren't complicated moves. They're not even particularly dramatic. But they require something that I think is harder than any specific financial strategy. Doing the unglamorous, repetitive work without getting distracted by the next level before the current one is solid. That's the challenge. That's always been my challenge. Staying where I am long enough to actually get it right, instead of reaching for the next thing while the current thing is still unstable. I'm working on it. Let me end with something practical. Not a 5-step plan, not a system, just the things that I've observed, in my own experience and in everything I've read, that actually move people up this ladder, versus the things that feel like they should work, but mostly don't. The gap. I've said this before, but I'll say it again here because it's the mechanism underneath everything. The gap between income and spending is the single variable that determines how fast you move. Not income alone. The gap. A high income spent completely is level 0, stays level 0. A moderate income with a consistent protected gap can reach level 3 or 4 over a long enough time. This is counterintuitive to most people because we're trained to think of income as the primary variable. More income, more progress. But income without the gap is just a bigger treadmill. Guard the gap like it's the most valuable thing you have, because when you're building, it is. Starting where you are, not where you wish you were. This sounds obvious. It isn't in practice. Most people delay the start because they're waiting for a better starting position. A higher income, less debt, a cleaner situation to build from. There is no cleaner situation that's coming. The situation you're in is the one you build from. And the compounding math doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It just starts, or it doesn't, based on whether you started or didn't. Avoiding the horizontal move. This is specific, and I think it's underappreciated. The most dangerous moment on this ladder, in terms of losing momentum, isn't when things get hard. It's when things get slightly better. When income increases, when a debt gets paid, when there's more margin than usual, there's a very natural human impulse to let the spending catch up to the new level. You worked for this improvement. You deserve to enjoy it. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes enjoying an improvement is the right call. But if it becomes the consistent pattern, if every improvement in income automatically becomes new consumption and the gap never grows, then you're making horizontal moves. You're at level 0 with a nicer car, still level 0. The vertical move, the one that actually takes you up the ladder, requires letting some of the improvement accumulate. Not all of it, but some. That's the discipline. And it's harder than it sounds, because the horizontal move feels like progress. It looks like progress. It has all the social rewards of progress. It just doesn't change your level. Time. The last thing, and the simplest. This ladder is climbed over years, sometimes decades. There's no version of this that's fast. There are versions that are faster and versions that are slower, based on the choices I've described. But the underlying process, the compounding, the accumulating, the slow building of something real, that process requires time. And it rewards patience in a way that almost nothing else in modern life does. We're not set up to be patient. The culture isn't built for it. Everything around us is optimized for speed, for now, for the immediate. But the ladder doesn't care about the culture. It works at the pace it works. And the people who reach the top of it are almost universally the people who understood that and kept building anyway. 7 levels, -1 to 5. Most people will spend their lives without ever consciously thinking about which one they're on. Without a map, without a direction, without any way to know if the work they're doing is moving them somewhere or just keeping them in place. That's not a moral failing. It's a gap in the information most people receive about how money and freedom actually work. The framework I described today didn't come from me. I found it in a book, thought about it seriously, and found that it matched things I'd been feeling but couldn't name. What I hope it does for you is what it did for me. Give you a location. Even if it's not where you wanted to be. Even if it's lower on the ladder than you'd assumed or hoped. A real location, clearly identified, is the beginning of a real direction. And a real direction is worth more than any amount of optimism about a vague future where things are somehow better. You know where you are. Now you know what the next step looks like. That's enough to start.